Today we start out and we do the agricultural revolution. Okay, first off for your timeline, I think the two major points. I think we'll start with 1600. We'll do 1700. That's where most of the action is, and then later on maybe we hit the 1800. This unit is not as formal of a timeline. There's not that many dates. It's more of like an overall shift in society. The clusters for this are the same clusters that we had for so many others, right? Are the clusters, which is number one. Overall, it's not about farming changing. We don't actually care about farming changing all that much. All that happens with farming is more food, which is important, is a key concept, and does affect Europe. But what we're really doing is changing society. All right, so we're changing the status quo. Right? Which we're changing the way people, rulers, and classes interact. We are going from the old feudal society, we are going to, I don't know if I have a title for it, yeah, let's say we're going towards the urban or the market, the free market society, okay? Feudal society where the priests, the lords, and the nobles, think about synthesizing it with our next unit, where we have the estates of France, which are literally the priests, the nobles, and everyone else, and moving towards eliminating those old feudal roles and coming in something new. So, number one, let's look at, old agriculture. Old agriculture, okay? And there's no specific date for this, but I'll usually tell you around the 1700s. Let's draw a line. So the old way is subsistence agriculture. And what does subsistence agriculture mean? You're farming for survival. Okay, you are farming to feed you and feed your family. That's it. Which is an issue because that means if you have one bad summer, if you have one famine, if you have 1 month without much rain, what's going to happen? You're going to starve to death and you're going to die. All right, which is generally negative in most family life. The bigger thing, besides subsistence agriculture, besides the 3-crop rotation, right? That's where you did crop A, crop B, and left the third one empty. What do we call that? Remember? Fallow, right? Fallow. So that it can grow some clover and get some nutrients back. What's more important about the old way is the feudal village. All right? What's at the center of the feudal village? It shows you the feudal society. There's a church, number one, because the priests are important. What's number two? What else is in there? The manor. The manor. Or for bigger villages, the castle, where the noble lives. Because that's the center of life. They run everything. So priests and nobles right in the center. The other thing is around the outside. Just outside of the city center, we have all the peasant huts. And then all around the cities and the towns, we have communal land. Communal land. Where people all farm together. And why does everybody in society do their best to farm together? So they don't die. Because it's subsistence agriculture. We don't have great agricultural practices, and we rely so much on that. Now, in the background of all of this, we have the exploration. And one of the biggest means of exploration is when Spain got to Bolivia, what did they find? Silver. Gold and silver. They bring it all back to Europe, and we end up with the, the price revolution. Which means there's more money in society. It's kind of like hyperinflation. Maybe not hyperinflation, but it is inflation over a longer period of time because more in gold and silver because of exploration. And what that leads to is really what changes into our new way of agriculture. In our new agriculture, the agricultural revolution. Who leads the agricultural revolution, by the way? England, Netherlands, big two. England, Netherlands is big two. So the agriculture, we have commercialization. What's commercialization of agriculture mean?
Machines are doing the work.
No, not machines yet. They are manufacturing, burn! They are manufacturing, or they are growing crops for money. They are growing crops for money, right? And the biggest movement in this, especially in England, is enclosure. And here's the point I'm not sure a lot of us really connected in the unit, and this is our biggest connection here. Because of the price revolution, there's more money in society. If there's more money in society, where does most of it go?
The church.
No. Right concept, wrong people. It goes to the rich. It goes to the elites. And what the elites do is they start to buy land, the enclosure movement. We're getting rid of this communal land, the feudal communal land, and this enclosure movement. This is going to give all the farms to the rich, which benefits the rich a lot. They will become richer, and it really changes the way society works. Peasants, you remember the term proletarianization? Good. Proletarianization is when we stop working for food and start working for what? Wages. Which is bad. Maybe good in the long run, bad here, because they simply are not going to make that much in wages right now. Okay? As the price revolution ends, peasants get less and less and less money. We did that practice test today, right? I mean, that's 1500s, but it's the same concept. They are getting less money. But not only are they getting less money, because of the commercialization of agriculture, because the elites own everything, because they can't grow the food themselves, the price of food rises considerably, which is bad for an economy because you will buy food no matter what, even if it takes all your life. Food prices rise, quality of life falls. Quality of life falls quite considerably. I would like to note here that we do see the rise of the importance of the nuclear family. Women in particular start to work with the men, start to work alongside the men, sometimes in the fields, sometimes at home, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay? And the last point is that we are beginning to see in the 1700s, as farming does improve, and by the late 1700s, when we get machines, we will see it much more heavily. But peasants work for lower wages, farms are bigger, which means you need less farm workers. They end up out of jobs, and what do a lot of these peasants do? Urbanization. Urbanization is almost a very good cluster to think of for several units. Because you can think of why did people urbanize and when did they urbanize. And this whole thing, all of this, is essentially why do peasants urbanize? Now, what does this lead to? What are the challenges for urbanization? Why is urbanization? Overcrowding, which leads to crime,
Unsanitary living conditions.
sanitation, and I would say poverty also. Because it's good to be a peasant farmer because at least you grow your food, right? You may not have any extra goods, but at least you grow your food. And the thing about this is the old people, the people who ran the bigger cities here, they were the elites, they were the nobles, even the guilds, the old workers' unions, they ran the cities and they kept complete control. But now you have a lot of peasants showing up, and they're going to start to demand some power, some attention. Now, 3, these don't necessarily follow the timeline anymore, but we are starting to develop a European market. A market economy.
There's some in that tray.
That's enough. Thank you.
You sure?
Yep. Promise. Market economy is buying and selling of goods primarily using money. All right. Along with that, we are going to see in the Enlightenment what big man with free market. Laissez-faire. Government stays out. Privatization. It's all Adam Smith, right? Free trade. Just buzzwords from the key concepts to throw in here. Market-driven wages. Market-driven wages means your wages are tied to the price of goods, which is a big deal because these peasants who are now in urban cities are going to go starving often. And if you remember studying the social upheaval in the 1700s and 1800s, 99% of all revolutions start with bread riots. Thank you. Okay. But here's the big one, most important for this section, is we start to develop 2 new systems of making money. They're kind of the link between agriculture and industry. And it is the putting out system and the cottage industry. And you don't need to know the complete difference between the two. Just know this, that whole families, whole nuclear families work together in their household, right? The putting out system is, Carbo, will you close the door, please? The putting out system is when the merchant would show up on Sunday. The merchant would sell the family a bunch of plain cotton, right? And all throughout the week, the family would take that cotton and they would put it into string, right? And then at the end of the week, they would sell the string to the merchant at a slightly higher price. And the merchant would sell them more raw cotton. And what would the merchant take with that string? What would the merchant do with that string? Go to the next house, sell it to a family. That family would take the string and make linen. The merchant would buy it back. Go to the next house. That family would take the linen and make a t-shirt, right? And then sell it back to the merchant. That's the putting out system. But what we see, perhaps most importantly in here, because it echoes in the Industrial Rev, which you'll see when we cover that timeline, is we start to see new financial practices, new ways that people and governments are handling money. And the biggest one in these smart countries is they develop what important financial institution? Banking. Why are banks going to be important for the Industrial Rev? If you want to build a railroad or you want to build a factory, you're not going to have that much money. You need to borrow it. What country really does a bank early on? England. Bank of England is very good. France doesn't have one. France doesn't have one in 1600s. France doesn't have one in 1700s. When does France get one? 1802 or 1803, because Napoleon puts the centralized Bank of France there. You also see ideas like insurance start to come to be, right? Because if you have a farm or a factory burn down, you're a little bit screwed. My last point for this, and I'm not going to write much up here, but with the urbanization and the agricultural rev in general, we see society change, social change. And if you can look at the timeline that I have printed out, let's just run through it. As people move into cities, or even as towns become bigger, and less people are peasant farmers, more people are in town more often, they invent some new activities. Most of them are communal activities, right? Like religious festivals or Saints' Day festivals or carnivals. The College Board likes to use the term carnivals to explain most of these. Now the church starts to see some moral weaknesses, such as crime, prostitution. And the way the church stops this is by communal, what do we call it? Communal norms? Enforced communal norms. Public humiliation is really the best word for it, right? Put people in the stocks, big sign up says, this is a prostitute, right? Or this person stole. Public shaming. That's what I was looking for. So before 1700, what we talked about with old agriculture, if you had the weather determined a lot of your life. If you had a bad share, if you had a bad harvest, then you would die. You remember Human Geo, we talk about the development model, there's 5 stages of development. In the first one, it was all up and down, up and down, up and down. They were kind of in stage 1 because they were so dependent on the weather. And people were hungry, so we saw people die of famine and diseases. Okay. After 1700s, what's the one benefit, by the way? If a lot of people die off all the time, what's the benefit?
Overpopulation isn't an issue.
Thomas Malthus,
No, Thomas Malthus. This is the big one. What did you say?
More jobs.
There's more jobs, right? If half the teachers at Turpin High School die off right now, when I walk into school tomorrow, what am I going to do? I'm going to say, listen, I'm going to do about twice the work. That's fine, but you're going to pay me twice as much, right? And my quality of life will actually improve. I may die of stress, but my quality of life will actually improve. After 1700, with no more plagues, no more famine, no more death, we have more people. Now we have overqualified. If double the teachers walk through the door tomorrow, what is Mr. Spencer going to say to me?
You're taking a pay cut.
Yeah, you're taking a pay cut. He wouldn't fire me. Says you're taking a pay cut, right? And if I complain, he's going to fire me and hire somebody else. Question, Drew?
At this point with the market economy, were the countries just in Europe the ones that were doing like international trade, or was it with
The background of all this is that exploration in the 1500s really did open up the market world. In exploration, this is the era of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company. So this is all in the background. It's what leads to that price revolution. To finish this off, we talk about it in industrialization again, but more food, healthy babies, healthy mothers, less babies die. Our population doesn't rise. Our population That's the sound population makes. Our population does exponential growth. And the last point, there is eventually going to be more money in the pockets of the people. And that will improve eventually their quality of life. The College Board mentioned specifically porcelain plates. That's what it says at the bottom if you can't read it. They have porcelain dishware. Congratulations. We now have porcelain dishware. That's in your College Board, guaranteed you need to know it. Porcelain dishware, better clothes, novels, better houses. They come up with better means of entertainment like taverns and theaters. That's essentially what it says at the bottom there.
More child morality instead of child mortality.
Same difference. I'll leave it on there too. Questions about agricultural rev? Good. Flip to a blank timeline. Blank timeline, right? French Rev. This one's going to be a little more detailed, but you should remember every little bit of it. Yeah, I don't remember who Louis XIV is, but I remember that at some point we developed porcelain plates. All right, for this timeline, let's take 1600 all the way on the left. Put 1700 pretty close next to it. This is going to look a little weird. And then 1800 all the way at the end. Reason being, most of the French Rev is going to be in the 1700s, so we need a little bit more. I hate pink. There we go. Do you have normal chalk? Go yellow. So, French Rev. French Rev, and fill this in along with me. Before the French Rev, what eras are coming along beforehand that I think we should mention? Number one, absolutism. That's absolutely most important because the French Rev is so much about the destruction of the old king and the destruction of the old social classes. But keep in mind, for the first stage of the French Revolution, they're not getting rid of the king, okay? So absolutism is actually going to stick around for a little bit. Agricultural revolution is starting to go on in France and definitely in Britain. The big one you have to mention. What era comes right before the French Rev?
The Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment. Please keep that in mind. If you get a French Rev question, you will talk about what group of men. Who inspired it? The philosophes. They inspired it above all else. What comes after? What event really ends the French Rev? The death or the Napoleon's second exile. We end up with the Congress of Vienna. That's what my timeline on the conservative liberals in the 1800s. It starts with the Congress of Vienna because that's the end of the liberal Napoleon, liberal French Rev, and the rise of the conservative powers. So know that comes after. And also, one big impact the College Board makes several references to in its key concepts is that this is, so let's do Congress of Vienna, this is the rise of nationalism in much of Europe. As Napoleon comes through and beats the bejesus out of all of these groups of people in Europe, it helps kind of bring those people together. Most notably, who? The Germans and the Prussians. Very good. Okay. So the clusters, I think we again go with the change of status quo. In this case, we're not going from, in this case, we're going from the old feudal states, feudal estates, I should say. And we're ultimately, what's the French Rev trying to put in place in France? Yeah, at first, we would say constitutional monarchy with a hint of democracy, but democracy is the ultimate goal, so you're right. Okay? And finally, I really think we should mention the Enlightenment again. Okay, I really think that we should mention the Enlightenment again. The idea of individual rights, personal freedoms, that is the biggest point of so many of the actual philosophies. So let's look at three things. Let's start with number one, causes. The first, the biggest, the most important cause of the French Revolution is the Three Estates. First estate is the church. Second estate is the nobles. And the third estate is everyone else. All right. So the estates are what really drives it. And if you remember all the way back to some of my first timelines, we talked about exploration and how that brings a new, significant, important group of people into play. These are the new elites. Okay? Do you remember what the new elites were? What jobs do they have? Bankers and merchants are the two. Some of those are right, upper middle class, but bankers and merchants are the two most important. Okay? Now, where do they go on this line? Who do they fit in with?
Everyone else.
They usually fit in with everybody else, but there is still a small group that actually get in with the nobles. Okay, so we have this new elite, bankers, merchants. These guys are with everybody else. There is a group of them that becomes so strong and powerful, the king gives them a job, and they actually get to become a noble. They get a piece of paper that says they're a noble. Do you remember what their name was? The nobles, what did you say? New. That would definitely be wrong. Nobles of the robe. Gray box term, important to the College Board. These nobles of the robe used to be everybody else, but they earned the power of the second estate. Do you know why they're important? Why we reference them?
They're the ones who are like, hey, we should stop.
They're some of the nobles, some of the second class, who are actually for changing the system. They say, we have way too much power. This is not okay. This is not enlightened. There are some priests that join along with them, some good priests that say, hey, this is not the plan. This is politics. This is taking advantage of people. Now, there is also a financial crisis that pops up. A financial crisis, specifically in the mid-1700s. What was it? It's when France started to drop down after Louis XIV, and England rises to take their place. What's that moment? 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War, which is a world war, right? It's America, it's the French and Indian War. So the financial crisis, the 7 Years' War, and then finally, what always starts all of the revolutions, there are crop failures, right? At the end of the 1780s, there are about 3 or 4 years where it is not quite as rainy out that summer as it was other years. Okay, so those are our causes. Now let's see if we can fit this in one. Next up, is the second phase. Next up is the first phase. What's the first phase called?
The liberal phase.
Thank you. The liberal phase. Guys, this is where we can say it's the calmer phase. Even though it starts with a little craziness, it's the calmer phase. What starts the, it's all going to be down here, but for argument, let's put it here. What starts all this?
Storming the Bastille.
Yeah. True answer is that the tennis court oath, the obliteration of the Estates General, which is where this old feudal order really showed its power. That's what starts this liberal revolution. But the Bastille always becomes famous. And Bastille is the date you got to know? What day of the year? July? You're all fired. I'm going to tell the wife on you. Polina, gold star. July 14th, which is important because...
It's your wife's birthday.
No, it's not my wife's birthday. God, stop Cheneyizing the whole thing. Cheney's birthday? No, he turned 40 in February. He doesn't turn 40 in July. The first liberal phase. It's really quite simple. You should know it pretty well. I can actually teach this through 3 documents. The ultimate goal of the liberal phase is to set up what kind of government? A constitutional monarchy. Which means the Bourbons, who's king right now, Louis XVI, will still be in charge, but he will have a constitution of laws that he has to follow. Okay? So what are the 3 documents that prove this? Let's do the Declaration of the Rights of Man.
Rob Stoll, call extension 2800. Rob Stoll, call extension 2800.
Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is really takes ideas from whom?
Montesquieu.
It takes ideas from the philosophers, right? And John Locke. Okay, natural rights. Okay, what's the government's role to protect the rights of the citizens? What are some of those rights? Freedom of religion, freedom of expression, stuff like that, right? Which goes from philosophers to American Rev, Declaration of Independence, to French Rev, Declaration of the Rights of Man. The next point you should note is the civil constitution of the clergy. The civil constitution of the clergy said that the clergy was no longer had extreme legal power, that they must follow the rules of the government. If the Pope says something and the government says something else, if you're going to live in France, you have to follow the government above all else. All right? And the last document is the actual Constitution of 1791. The actual Constitution of 1791, which set up the constitutional monarchy. Right? And who is the... we go from the Estates General, which is the three estates, to the National Assembly, which is a freely elected body of lawmakers. Not universal manhood suffrage. In order to vote, you had to do what?
Own a land.
You had to own land. Okay. Drew, a question?
When was the Estates General? Like what year?
States General is about 1350-ish, all the way up until Louis XIV. When Louis XIV takes power, what does he do? He says, don't bother meeting a States General. Okay, I don't need you. And Louis XIV is so good at building his pyramid of power, he gets away with it. So the States General doesn't meet for years and years and years and years and years. And I don't know the exact date, but the way to remember it is this. Because of this financial crisis, Louis XIV in 1788 or early 1789 has to call the Estates General because France is in more trouble than it's been in over 100 years. So he calls the Estates General just before the storming of the Bastille. It acts like it normally does. All the people get so mad because they've been enlightened. They know that this is not how the world should work anymore. So they storm out, sign the tennis court oath, create the National Assembly. King still doesn't do anything, so they storm the Bastille and start the revolution. Right? Good question. Now, what is our bridge? What is our bridge between the liberal phase, the first liberal phase, and the second radical phase? Drew, I heard you say it.
They kill Louis.
Louis the 16th is beheaded. Okay. If you remember, everything was going kind of hunky-dory. Then Louis the 16th, you remember what he did? He tried to run away, right? But they caught him. And what did the National Assembly do? Slapped him on the wrist and says, don't do that again. And that's when the radicals, the really wild people, who never wanted a constitution, they want no king. They want pure democracy. They rise up and take power. They take the government, they chop the head off Louis the 16th, which is really, 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 really dangerous. Why is it really dangerous? Who's everyone? The rest of Europe is going to be terrified now. All right, these guys are off the wall. This should not happen. Okay. So the radical phase, behead Louis the 16th. The one guy you need to know that we can tie everything to is Robespierre. Robespierre. As he takes in, as France is in chaos as we enter this radical phase, Robespierre starts the Reign of Terror. Right. Lasts about a year, where he tries to find everybody who is an enemy of the state and chop their head off. To do this, he creates the Committee of Public Safety. Committee of Public Safety to search out and find everybody's bad. If you had to synthesize this with something, what would you pick?
KGB.
You could do the KGB, very good. Great purges. You could do the SS and the Gestapo.
Communist trials.
You could do American history too, right? McCarthyism. Okay? McCarthyism, the search for the communists, right? Anyway, find them, do it, chop off everybody's head. We kill tens of thousands of people. I do want to mention right here that this, well, Part of the reign of terror is, and this is what I love, these guys are liberal. To say to the clergy, you can still be our priest, be in charge of our heavenly selves in our salvation, but you are not going to collect taxes and be laws anymore. The radicals go further, and they say, priests, you're not allowed to be priests anymore. Get out of my country, right? They go through, College Board uses the term de-Christianization. De-Christianization, right? And we do that practice DBQ that I gave you. We have a DBQ that's about them inventing a new calendar at this time, because the old calendar is based too much on Christian ideals. We want to get rid of it entirely. Let's come up with a new calendar with new holidays, with new festivals. I do also want to mention they have one gray box term where there's a couple people that are early on are friends with Robespierre, but he gets so radical he even cuts their heads off. Danton is the most famous. Do you remember the other guy, the bathtub guy? Marat.
There's the painting up there.
Yeah. Danton and Marat, they are ultimately killed by Robespierre because he becomes super, you remember, super paranoid. The best political cartoon of it is that Robespierre standing on the Constitution of 1793, which set up the democracy, and he is pulling the guillotine, right? And the caption is basically Robespierre is killing the guillotiner, the executioner, because he's already killed everybody else. Right? That's the reign of terror. Ultimately, this will end. And the reason it ends in 1794 is because this is just too wild. It's too radical. People don't want to be a part of this anymore. So we enter stage 4. And what's stage 4? Napoleon. So we enter stage 4, which is late 1790s and into, when's the end of Napoleon?
1815.
1814, he's exiled. 1815 is the Congress of Vienna. Either's right. My favorite human being in world history. Right? The way he takes power, do you remember? He was invited to be a consul, and he will make his way to be emperor. How does he make his way to be emperor? The plebiscites, right? He has them vote along the way. Can I be consul for life? Can I be first consul and rule over everybody else? Can I be the only consul? Can I be emperor? And he earns his right. It's the same thing who does? Same thing that Hitler does. So we move from consul to emperor, all right? And what he does, there's two things we should know. An A and a B. Number one is military conquest. The goal of Napoleon is, number one, to spread revolutionary ideas. Spread the French Revolution. Get rid of the old feudal order. Get rid of divine right kings. Get rid of these old nobles. And then finally, this military conquest, we should also mention, as I set up there, it brings about much nationalism in the countries of Europe. The other point for Napoleon we want to make, B, is his reform. And we want to say that there is good reform, positive reform, and negative reform. His good reform, education. Do you know what the big one is? He creates a set of laws that's universal for all of France and all the stuff he conquers. The Napoleonic Code, say instead the Civil Code. Same thing, but College Board uses the Civil Code. Civil Code. And what it said, what it did to help destroy the status quo, is it said no matter who you are, you will follow our laws. No matter who you are, whether you're noble, a priest, or a regular person, you will follow the laws that I, Napoleon, sets forth. The other good stuff is he centralizes the government. We talked in the last chapter that he's going to set up the bank, right? He will eventually set up a bank which helps France industrialize. And he also actually gets peace with the church. He signs something called the Concordat of 1801. Which invites the church. It unde-Christianizes and invites the priests back in. Now he says, you're going to follow the civil code, and if I don't like you, I'm going to get rid of you. But the priests are allowed back in. The bad reform, if you want to be a powerful emperor, you need two things. You've got to ultimately stop people fighting against you. How do you stop people from fighting against you? Secret police and censorship. Secret police and censorship. The last phase, almost there, about 5 more minutes. The last phase, and it's not really the last phase, we're going to write it up. The end, let's just say the end of Napoleon, is going to be all the way over here, 1814, 1850, and that is going to be the Congress of Vienna. Now, I talk about this a lot more in the next couple timelines. In the 1800s class struggle between conservatism and liberalism, we will focus on this a lot more. But key concepts we want here is they are ultimately trying to put conservatism back. They want to stop the revolution. Stop this idea of popular sovereignty. Stop this idea of divine right, or of not having divine right. Stop this idea of limiting absolute monarchies. They want to go back to the old way in all the countries. They will actually create something called forget the name of it, but it's called the Congress system, and there's another name for it, where all the countries gather together whenever there's a liberal threat anywhere in Europe. They all gather together. Russia, Austria, the French Bourbons, England, they all gather their armies together and go and crush the liberals. And find whatever little king. What?
Is this with Metternich?
Yes, Metternich.
Metternich, sorry.
Good. Yes, that's exactly it. But the ultimate goal of the Congress of Vienna is after the destruction of Napoleon. After France became super big and powerful, what does the Congress of Vienna want to restore? The balance of power. He wants to restore the balance of power. There's 2 things that I stole out of the key concepts and we should mention. First up, women. They participate heavily in much of the French Revolution. They are there when the Bastille is stormed, right? They are in the salons discussing these ideas during the Enlightenment. They actually have a women's march when they go and get Louis XVI and drag him out of Versailles back into Tuileries in Paris. Right? However, so women do have a lot of impact here. However, there's still no citizenship. Still no citizenship for women. There's going to be no voting for women. And most of the time as we move on through the revolution, women will start to take steps back. They will start to be held back, and we don't talk about them much for the latter years. Okay? One big sign of this is Rousseau. He's actually a radical philosopher because, well, a bunch of different reasons. But one big thing he says is that, I don't want to call him anti-woman, but he's very old-fashioned woman. That a woman has a place in securing the family. She does not have a place in intellectual matters. Right? And he becomes pretty popular, even though he's dead and gone. His writings become pretty popular during the French Rev. And that's really what's acted on. Napoleon himself, one of the weaknesses of Napoleon, you can put it down here for negatives, is his Napoleonic Code, his civil code, does not give women a lot of rights. It really actually pulls women back just a little bit. But we start to see a couple hints that maybe women are going to take a step forward sometime. And we'll use 2 examples. What's the French example? Olympe de Gouges. Olympe de Gouges, right? What's she write? Declaration of the Rights of Women, calling for women to stand up for their rights, much like men are doing for all of France. What's going to happen to her? Head cut off, very good. And then we have an English woman named Wollstonecraft. How do I spell it? Mary Wollstonecraft will call for much the same stuff as Olympe de Gouges, but she'll call for it from Great Britain a little bit more safely.
How much prettier Olympe de Gouges' name is?
Olympe de Gouges. It's French.
And then there's Wollstonecraft.
Wollstonecraft.
Her daughter was married Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein.
Boom. Daughter Mary Shelley, Enlightenment writer. Or romantic writer. Our last point, we can end for the day. It kind of sticks out a little bit, but College Board really likes to focus on this. They seem to ask this question a lot. It's, I can't spell his name. It is a revolutionary man. Toussaint L'Ouverture. He is a leader of what French colony? No. He is the leader of the French colony Saint-Dominique, which is their most important. And he listens to all the Enlightenment ideas, and he listens to all the French Rev ideas, and he says, hey, by those means, I'm pretty sure we should be able to rule ourselves. So this man leads Saint-Dominique in a revolutionary independence war, mostly against Napoleon. Napoleon tries to stop him, but Napoleon is too distracted by what's going on, so L'Ouverture leads Saint-Dominique to independence, and they become Haiti.
When did that happen?
That is the early 1800s. I believe he's active late 1700s, but I know it's Napoleon that ultimately says, all right, screw it, I don't care anymore. Any major questions? Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you. Do you want these timelines back?